Bismillah, in the next section of the book, it's essentially the beginning of the text after the introduction, Kitab al-Tahara. The great Imam al-Bahuti rahimahullah ta'ala says, Al-miyahu thalathatun, tahurun yarfa'u al-hadatha wa yuzilu al-najis al-tari'a wa huwa al-baqi ala khilqatihi walau hukman كمتغير بمكثه أو طحلب أو ورق شجر أو ممره ونحوه أو بمجاور نجس وكره منه شديد حر أو برد ومسخن بنجس لم يحتج إليه أو بغير ممازج كدهن وقطع كافور أو بملح مائي لا مسخن بشمس أو طاهر. Here, the chapter of purification. So here, tahara, this type of purification, linguistically, it means cleanliness or purity from filth, be that filth material or immaterial. So material filth, we're talking about like physical dirtiness, physical filth and dirt. Immaterial are things like transgression, sin, anything that would detract from a person's status and honor. That's the linguistic meaning of tahara. So when we're talking about tahara min al-dhunub, purification from sin, we're talking about the linguistic meaning of that and not the legal meaning. The legal meaning is very specific. The legal meaning is the removal of a hadith or something similar in meaning, a hadith or something similar in meaning. We're going to discuss hadith in greater detail later. Similar to a hadith is, the example would be washing the hands after waking from a night's sleep, which is basically something that is purely devotional. And so it's similar to a hadith, but not completely so. However, just to understand that this is the technical definition, some of these things will become clear as we progress in the text, what they actually mean. So try and keep them in your mind or jot them down, and then you can always revisit that to add some points for clarity's sake. He says this is considered similar in meaning because it's an obligation but has no obvious cause, as I mentioned, and or the end of the definition, and or the elimination of a khabith. The khabith is the actual physical matter which is deemed impure, najis, by the Islamic law. So typically, right, this process of purification is completed by using water. And that's why the Imam begins and he says water is of three types. So you can either make wudu with it or not. That's one. You can either make wudu with it or not. If you can make wudu with it, it's called tahur. It's called tahur. If you cannot make wudu with the water, it's going to either be water which is permissible to consume or it's not permissible to consume. If you can consume it, it's known as tahir. And if you cannot consume it, it is known as najis. So tahur, water, which is a purifier or an abluent. Tahur water is that which is used to purify things. It eliminates a hadith, which refers to whatever comes out of either the urinary tract, gastrointestinal tract, or vaginal cavity in general, right? So the act of passing whatever comes out and whatever requires wudu, which is known as a minor hadith, or ghusl, which is known as a major hadith. And so this is what is used, this category of water, tahur water, and removes extrinsic impurities, meaning the najasa. So these are the actual physical purities, as opposed to a hadith, which is a state. It's a state of being. It's a wasfun qa'imun bil badan, basically. It's a state of being, yamna'u al-insanu min as-salah, basically prevents somebody, yumna'u min as-salah, or prevents someone, or it prevents the prayer from being performed. So it removes these extrinsic impurities, najasa. So if najasa is on the clothes, on the body, or on the place of prayer, it has to be removed, and it's done so with this category, tahur. He says it is that water which is in its original state, such as being either fresh, salt, or brackish. Right? So the water, they come in various different states, natural original states, even if only legally deemed so. And this is an indication that water in its original state is of two categories. Water which has not been adulterated with anything, like recently fallen rainwater, melted snow or ice, and water from the ocean, river, well, or spring. This is It's all unadulterated, hasn't been mixed with anything. And the second category is water which has been adulterated in a manner which does not strip its abluent nature, like what has changed due to stagnation, which is a type of water that the Prophet ﷺ made wudu with, or due to algae or tree leaves which have fallen, either fallen on their own or have been placed in the water. Its conduit, which could introduce sulfur or lead into the water, which is what we sometimes can smell out of our own tap water at home. You may note a slight smell of sulfur or lead, and that's because of the pipes that are used as a conduit to deliver that water, etc. Or a neighboring impurity, which is the result of its odor carried over by the wind. So there's water in its container, or it's being held in a body, and then maybe next to it or close by is some type of impurity, and the odor of that impurity is blown onto the water, and it has some type of impact, but certainly not enough to change the water in any real way. So all of this is considered tahur. The above mentioned types are all tahur and not disliked or considered makruh, those above mentioned types. He goes on and he says that which is extremely hot, extremely cold, and the reason that he's mentioning extreme temperatures, hot or cold, is because it's likely that a complete purification will not be achieved while attempting to cope with the extreme temperatures. So something too hot or too cold, using that, you're not likely to be very thorough, and in fact, you're more likely to be negligent because, of the extreme temperature. He says, or unnecessarily warmed with an impurity, because warming water with an impurity, it's highly likely that the smoke and or ash will end up in the water, and if it does, it will ruin a small amount of water. But if there's nothing else available, the disliked nature is voided, and it becomes an obligation to use that water. So this type of water is considered disliked. It's considered disliked. And we're still talking about tahur water, by the way. This is just like there's tahur water, which is completely tahur. There's no associations of makruh to it. And now we're talking about tahur water, which is makruh. So here is one of those examples: unnecessarily warmed with an impurity, due to the fact that it could be changed by the smoke or the ash. He says, which is coupled with something insoluble like lipid or pieces of camphor. Lipid, which is like a fat or an oily substance, or camphor, because they don't actually fully dissolve with the water, but they are present in it, and therefore the water is closer related to something which is changed due to proximity. He goes on and he says, or pan salt. Now that's how I've translated this, pan salt, which is salt that remains, this is a type of salt that remains after evaporation, basically like from salty water, which evaporates, and then there's that salt. And it can be blown around into other sources of water, and is typically found in marshes and bogs. Is disliked, but not water warmed by the sun or something pure. So all of these categories here are considered disliked. That which is extremely hot or cold, that which is unnecessarily warmed with an impurity, something that's been coupled with something insoluble like lipids or camphor, or something that has been mixed with pan salt, or pan salt has been mixed in it. So there's a difference between pan salt, as I described, or like the salt of the earth, which is al-milh al-ma'dani. They make a distinction between these two things, which is basically the salt that is mined from the earth, as opposed to salt which is evaporated from the water, which is like sea salt. So the difference between like your average table salt and sea salts. So you understand. Basically, that sea salt is naturally occurring. It's a naturally occurring ingredient to some waters, and if it mixed with others, it's kind of like it is in its original source of sorts. However, not water warmed by the sun or by something pure. So the author, why would he mention this part about water warmed with the sun or warmed with something pure, like using wood or using gas or electricity to warm your water. Basically, like, can you make wudu or ghusl with warm water, which is something that most of us are doing these days. So the author likely separated water, which is warmed by the sun or something pure, from the previous section of permissible water types. Up at the top, he could have mentioned this. He could have mentioned this as included with the other types of permissible tahur water. However, he saved this until this point, and the reason for that is likely because he's emphasizing its permissible nature. It's because there is a narration which is reported from Aisha radiallahu anha of warming up water in the sun, and the Prophet ﷺ telling her not to do so because it leads to leprosy. This is a hadith. This hadith from the Prophet ﷺ telling Aisha not to warm up the water in the sun because it leads to leprosy. However, the hadith is considered weak by some, it's considered fabricated by others, and also some that have disputed this hadith from the medical community, basically saying like there's no medical scientific evidence to support this. So it's kind of like asking you to accept something that is not, it's not real, or it's not proven. So there you have it. And so he's basically mentioning this as a permissible type to clarify and emphasize the fact that even though there is this narration, we need to remember that narration is not used to establish a prohibition or to establish the dislike nature or the impermissible nature of water that is warmed up. And there's also a report on the authority that he would warm water in a dish and use, this is the authentic authority, if you will, that he would use water in a dish that he would warm, and he would use it for ghusl. So there is a precedent established that the Prophet ﷺ would actually warm up water to use in the process of purification, which kind of, when you look at those two narrations, the one which is said was weak or fabricated and is also like contradictory to medical knowledge. And then this one, which proved that he did warm up water, that's the reason that the Imam is mentioning it here as opposed to the previous point. And so this kind of gives you an idea into the mind of the fuqaha and how they will place things in their text in certain orders. Like I said, everything is arranged and ordered in a specific way. It's not done haphazardly. So that's why this is mentioned in that point. The next part of this chapter, he goes on and he says, وَإِنْ خَلَتْ مُكَلَّفَةٌ بِيَسِيرٍ لِطَهَارَةٍ كَامِلَةٍ عَنْ حَدَثٍ لَمْ يَرْفَعْ حَدَثَ رَجُلٍ. This wraps up the first category. He says, if a woman of legal capacity meaning pubescent and of sound mind, be she a Muslim or not, free or bondwoman, secludes herself for a complete obligatory purification, which includes all relevant conditions and requirements, from ritual impurity, be it minor or major, with a small amount of water, which is defined as less than qullatayn, right? So when we're talking about waters, if it's a small or meager amount, it's less than qullatayn. That is the term you need to remember and memorize, qullatayn or qullatan. So anything qullatan and above is going to be considered a large amount or an abundant amount of water. Anything that is below qullatayn is considered a small or meager amount. He says it here is referring to the remaining unused water. So if you have to imagine that there's a vessel or a container of water that the woman is using that water from. We're not talking about the water which she used and is now dripped off of her and perhaps collected somewhere. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the unused water, that it remains in that source. It says the remaining unused water will not eliminate the ritual impurity of a pubescent man, nor will it eliminate that of a hermaphrodite, a true hermaphrodite, meaning they have both genitalia, due to the possibility of them being a true male. And they're not permitted to use that water for an obligatory or voluntary act of worship or to wash the deceased. This is based on a hadith reported in the 5 hadith collections in which the Prophet ﷺ prohibited a man from making wudu in the excess water used for the purification of a woman. Okay, so this is a hadith that establishes this ruling. So what does that mean? Here's a quick side note. What does it mean, the 5 collections of hadith? The 5 collections of hadith. This is according to Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. It says that the method used by the great scholars to cite the hadith, and they would use terms like this in order to, basically to shorten their citation. Instead of having to write all of the books of the authors of the hadith collections out, they would use terms to shorten that citation. And he says that the hadith used in religious rulings, the citation method is as follows. So number 1 is al-Bukhari and Muslim. So the term that's used is akhrajahu. Akhrajahu basically means like both reported by, but reported by both al-Bukhari and Muslim. The next one is Imam Ahmed, Abu Dawood, al-Tirmidhi, al-Nasa'i, wa Ibn Majah, and it would be Rawahu al-Khamsa, and that is what is being referred to with this hadith, meaning this hadith was reported by the 5, Ahmed, Abu Dawood, al-Tirmidhi, al-Nasa'i, wa Ibn Majah. These are 5 great Imams in hadith. If it was Ahmed, al-Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, al-Tirmidhi, al-Nasa'i, wa Ibn Majah, this is like all of them together, it would be Rawahu al-Jama'ah, basically the collective have narrated it. And then if it was Imam Ahmed, al-Bukhari, and Muslim, it would be muttafaqun alayh. Imam Ahmed, al-Bukhari, and Muslim, when it comes to the hadith of ahkam, religious rulings, it is muttafaqun alayh. This ruling does not apply to a young girl, a woman secluded with a large amount of water or dust, her being secluded for only part of the purification process, a voluntary purification, which would be like making wudu again, tajdeed al-wudu, which basically renewal of wudu, even though you don't have to, means you're already in a state of wudu, but you just made one anyway, which is a voluntary purification, or the removal of najasa. It can be used to remove impurity and to eliminate the hadith of the young. Here's a note, right? So someone might say, oh, we got a situation, possible scenario, a little wrench in the works here. A non-Muslim woman is unable to produce the requisite intention. And she's excused from that when purifying herself. Why would that be a thing, right? So we're talking about the nature of this. He says, if a woman of legal capacity, we're not talking about Muslim women only, we're talking about a non-Muslim woman as well. So it's very possible that a Muslim man is married to a Christian or a Jewish woman, and she's required to purify herself after her monthly cycle or postpartum bleeding in order for him to be intimate with her. There you go. She may need to purify herself for his sake, which she's obliged to do. I mean, he's obliged to have her do that for him, to be permitted to be intimate. So one might say, well, you're talking about the requisite conditions have to be fulfilled while making wudu or ghusl or whatever it may be with this water, but how can a non-Muslim woman produce an intention, right? They can't, right? Because a part of the intention or part of that built into it is Islam, is being Muslim. And so here, that type of woman, a non-Muslim woman, she's excused from that because obviously she doesn't meet the underlying qualifications to make an intention. She's excused from that when purifying herself, okay? But the rest of it still remains. And so this still does apply to a non-Muslim woman. And this is what leads us into the second category of water, which we will pick up in the next video.